The Galactic Concordance had been classifying planets for approximately 12,000 standard cycles. And in all that time, they had developed what they considered to be a foolproof system. Class 1 worlds were garden paradises, where the most dangerous predator might give you a stern look before hopping away. Class 5 worlds were moderately challenging, featuring weather patterns that occasionally required you to wear a jacket. Class 10 worlds were the kind of places where evolution had apparently woken up one morning and chosen violence as its entire personality. Earth was a Class 12. The Concordance had needed to create new categories just to accommodate it. Then they'd needed to create subcategories. Then footnotes. Then appendices. Then a separate database with multiple trigger warnings and a mandatory psychological evaluation before access was granted. The planet was a nightmare wrapped in a catastrophe, sprinkled with extinction events, and served on a bed of things that should not exist but did anyway. Apparently just to prove the universe had a terrible sense of humor. But here's the thing about classification systems. They only work if people actually read them. The crew of the Varandian Claw had not read them. Captain Jexus stood at exactly 2.5 meters tall, which was considered average for a Kelzorian. His species had evolved on a moon with 0.6 standard gravity, breathed an atmosphere that was mostly noble gases, and had never encountered a predator larger than what humans would generously call a medium-sized cricket. This had given the Kelzorians a supremely unearned sense of confidence about their place in the universe. They'd developed faster-than-light travel before they'd invented the deadbolt, which should tell you everything you need to know about their threat assessment capabilities. His second-in-command, a Vryn named Thesic, was busy reviewing their latest contract on a datapad that looked comically small in his four-fingered hands. The Vryn were a species of cautious herbivores who had survived evolutionary pressure by being extremely good at running away and forming committee meetings to discuss whether they should have run away faster. Thesic had 17 different academic credentials in strategic planning, which made him fantastically overqualified for his current position of guy who stands next to the captain and nods. The target is confirmed in the diplomatic quarter of Station Helix 9, Thesic announced, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who has checked something 3 times and is quite proud of themselves for being thorough. A human, female, mid-30s by their reckoning. Name, Kira Valdez. Position, junior trade negotiator for the Terran Colonial Administration. Junior. Jexus's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smirk among his people. They're sending us after middle management? The client was very specific. Thesic continued, scrolling through the contract details. They want leverage in the upcoming trade negotiations. Apparently, this particular human has been quite effective at closing deals that favor Terra. The ransom demand is modest, the extraction should be simple, and the humans have demonstrated a pattern of paying quickly to retrieve their personnel. The third member of their crew, a Paxorian named Vict, made a sound like gravel being sorted by aggressive machinery. The Paxorians were silicon-based life forms who looked like someone had tried to build a person out of obsidian and rage, then given up halfway through, but the creation had continued anyway. Vict served as their muscle, which was appropriate because he was approximately 60% muscle, 30% mineral deposits, and 10% barely suppressed irritation at organic life forms and their squishy inefficiency. Humans, Vict rumbled, are registered as a combat species, are they not? Technically, Thesic admitted, making a gesture that was the Vryn equivalent of a dismissive hand wave. But their rating is based primarily on psychological factors and persistence rather than actual physical capability. They're Category 4 combatants at best. Individually, they're quite fragile. This was true, in the same way that saying fire is somewhat warm is true. Accurate in the narrowest technical sense, while missing the point so completely that it wraps back around to being impressive. The species brief lists them as endurance predators from a high-gravity world. Vict pressed, because despite his appearance, he was actually the smart one on this ship. 0.98 standard gravities, Thesic read off. Barely above galactic average. And yes, they're technically from a Class 12 world, but that classification is clearly an administrative error. The Concordance has been promising to review it for cycles. I mean, look at them. They require constant hydration. Their skin is permeable. They can't survive in vacuum for more than a minute or two. And they're so chemically dependent that they fall unconscious for a third of every rotation cycle. They do seem unnecessarily fragile. Zexus agreed. I once watched a human bump their lower manipulator appendage on a furniture item, and they acted as though they'd been mortally wounded for several minutes. All three of them found this hilarious. They had never experienced a stubbed toe. They did not know. They could not have known. The plan is simple, Zexus continued, pulling up a holographic display of Station Helix 9. We dock under the guise of merchant traders. Thesic creates a distraction in the main commerce sector. Vict and I intercept the target during her routine transit from her quarters to the diplomatic offices. We secure her in the cargo hold, make the jump to the rendezvous point, and transfer her to the client. We'll be in and out in less than 3 standard hours. What about station security? Vict asked, because he was still the smart. 1. Minimal, Thesic assured him. Helix 9 is a diplomatic station, not a military installation. Their security is designed to prevent arguments from escalating, not to repel boarding actions. And we're not staging a boarding action. We're just borrowing one small human for a few rotations. The thing about small mistakes is that they tend to have large consequences. And the crew of the Varandian Claw was currently making several small mistakes simultaneously, which was creating a cascade effect that would have been visible from space if anyone had been looking. Mistake 1. Assuming the classification system was wrong. Mistake 2. Not researching what Class 12 Deathworld actually meant. Mistake 3. Confusing fragile with vulnerable. Mistake 4. Choosing Kira Valdez as their target. Station Helix 9 rotated sedately in the Kepler terminus, serving as neutral ground for approximately 40 different species who all wanted to trade with each other, but didn't particularly trust each other. The diplomatic quarter was designed to accommodate wildly different physiologies, which meant the corridors were kept at a temperature that nobody found comfortable but everyone could tolerate. The atmosphere was a compromise that left everyone slightly oxygen-deprived, and the lighting was calibrated to a spectrum that every species described as not quite right. Kira Valdez found it pleasant, which should have been anyone's first clue that something was different about her. She was currently in her quarters, which were decorated in what the station's housing algorithm had determined was human standard aesthetic. This meant aggressively beige walls, furniture designed by someone who had seen pictures of chairs but never actually sat in one, and lighting that hummed at a frequency that suggested it was plotting something. She'd added a few personal touches. A potted plant that was thriving despite the alien atmosphere. Several books in actual paper form. And a photograph of mountains that looked like something had tried to punch holes in the planet, and the planet had lost. She was preparing for another day of trade negotiations, which was her polite way of saying, preparing to convince people who invented calculus before agriculture that they wanted to buy Terran exports. She was good at her job. Suspiciously good. The kind of good that made other species negotiators wonder if humans had some kind of telepathic advantage they weren't disclosing. They didn't. Humans just had the evolutionary benefit of learning negotiation from a species that couldn't outrun predators, but could definitely out-argue them. When your survival strategy for 200,000 years is convince the leopard that eating you is more trouble than it's worth, you develop certain skills. Kira was reviewing her notes for the day's sessions when her personal communication device chimed. She glanced at it, noted the sender, and felt the small smile that came with recognizing a challenge. The message was from a Kelzorian merchant group requesting an urgent meeting about mutual opportunities. The phrasing was just slightly off, the timing was suspicious, and the sender's credentials checked out but felt hollow, like a fruit that looks perfect but weighs too little. Interesting, she said to her empty quarters, which was a habit she'd picked up from spending too much time in space. The plant didn't respond, but she felt it was being supportive. She ran a quick background check through the station's public records. The Varandian Claw had docked 2 hours ago. Manifest listed them as carrying Vryn textiles and Kelzorian computational cores. Crew of 3. No violations, no flags, nothing interesting, which was itself interesting. Legitimate traders accumulated small violations the way ships accumulated dents. An absolutely clean record meant either exceptional competence or exceptional fraud. Given the message's phrasing, she was betting on fraud. Kira considered her options. She could report the suspicious contact to station security. She could ignore it. She could engage and see what they wanted. She chose option 3 because humans have a psychological trait that other species find baffling. They get curious about things that might kill them. This is because human evolutionary history is full of situations where the curious humans died, but the incurious humans starved. So natural selection did some complicated math and decided that curiosity was worth the risk. She sent a polite reply, agreeing to meet in a public area, then added a secondary layer to her plan by sending a coded message to station security with her location tracker activated and a time-delayed alert set for 30 minutes. If she didn't check in, they'd come looking. Then she dressed for the meeting, which meant her standard diplomatic attire. Practical clothing in earth tones, comfortable boots that she could run in if necessary, and a smile that had been refined over thousands of trade negotiations to convey exactly the right mixture of friendliness and, "I know what you're doing." The meeting location was in the neutral commerce sector, which was as neutral as things got on a station where neutral meant we've agreed not to shoot each other inside the building. Kira arrived exactly on time, which various species interpreted differently. Humans considered it polite, Vryn considered it aggressive, and Kelzorians considered it a sign of psychological instability. Zexus and Vict were waiting at a cafe that served beverages to oxygen breathers. Zexus looked pleased with himself in that way that tall people do when they're used to looking down at others. Vict looked like a geological formation that had gotten lost on its way to a different planet. "Negotiator Valdez," Zexus began, gesturing to a seat that was designed for someone with a completely different skeletal structure. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice." Kira sat, noting the positions, the exits, the security cameras, and the fact that Thesic was probably nearby creating whatever distraction they'd planned. She had approximately 15 minutes before things got interesting. "Of course," she replied, her tone perfectly calibrated between professional and cautious. "Though, I have to admit, your message was vague about the nature of these mutual opportunities." "Yes, well," Zexus's mandibles clicked in what he probably thought was a disarming manner. "We prefer to discuss such matters in person. Less chance of misunderstanding." This was true. It's much easier to kidnap someone when you're in person. much less chance of misunderstanding what's happening when someone grabs you. Across the commerce sector, Thesic was executing his part of the plan, which involved creating a minor incident with a cargo container that would draw security attention away from their target area. He was very good at creating minor incidents. He had practiced. What Thesic had not practiced was accounting for the fact that station security on a diplomatic station isn't actually stupid, just underpaid. And underpaid doesn't mean incompetent. Back at the cafe, Kira was listening to Zexus explain a fictional trade opportunity while mentally counting down the seconds until they made their move. She had clocked Vict's position as between her and the main exit, and noted that Zexus was angling to block her view of the secondary corridor. Amateur hour, she thought, but kept her expression interested. "The thing about Terran exports," she said, deliberately extending the conversation, "is that they require careful consideration of compatibility. Not just technical compatibility, but environmental. Many of our products are designed for Earth normal conditions." "And what exactly are Earth normal conditions?" Zexus asked, probably trying to keep her talking until Thesic's distraction was in play. Kira's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Something that humans recognized as the look someone gets when they're about to explain a really good joke that the other person won't understand until it's too late. "Challenging," she said simply. That's when the distraction started. Somewhere in the commerce sector, alarms began blaring. Security personnel started moving toward the incident. And Zexus made his move, which was to pull out a neural disruptor and aim it at Kira with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong before. "I apologize for the deception," he said, not sounding particularly apologetic. "But we're going to need you to come with us quietly. My associate has created a diversion, and we have a very narrow window to reach our ship." Vict moved closer, his silicon-based body mass making his intentions clear. She could walk, or she could be carried. Kira looked at the neural disruptor, then at Vict, then back at Zexus. Her expression went through a fascinating journey in about 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, calculation, resignation, and then something that Zexus would have recognized as dangerous if he'd had any experience with actual predators. "You're kidnapping me," she said. And it wasn't a question. "Temporarily borrowing," Zexus corrected. "You'll be returned unharmed once your government meets some very reasonable demands." "Huh," Kira said. Then she stood up slowly, hands visible. "And if I refuse?" Vict made his gravel-sorting noise, which was probably meant to be intimidating. To his credit, it was intimidating. Just not to someone from a planet where the weather had mood swings that registered on seismographs. "Then I carry you," Vict stated. Kira considered this. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay, but I should warn you, this is a really bad idea." "Your concern is noted," Zexus said dryly, gesturing toward the secondary corridor with his weapon. "Now move." They made it to the Varandian claw with surprising ease. Thesic's distraction had worked better than expected. Security was entirely focused on the cargo incident, and their hostage was being surprisingly cooperative. By the time they had Kira secured in the cargo hold and were initiating departure protocols, Zexus was starting to feel quite pleased with himself. "See?" he said to Vict as they sealed the cargo hold door. "I told you this would be simple. Humans have a reputation, but they're all talk." She didn't even try to resist. Inside the cargo hold, Kira was examining her surroundings with the kind of attention to detail that would have worried her captors if they'd been watching. The hold was a standard model, designed to carry non-perishable goods in atmosphere-controlled conditions. Temperature, 12 degrees standard. Atmospheric pressure, 0.8 standard. Oxygen content, 16%. Gravity, 0.6 standard. All of these conditions were, from a Kelsorian perspective, perfectly normal. From a Vrin perspective, slightly uncomfortable but manageable. From a Paxorian perspective, irrelevant because silicon-based life forms are notoriously difficult to inconvenience. From a human perspective, these conditions were a nice spring morning at moderate altitude. Kira sat on a cargo container and waited. She'd already sent her emergency signal before the kidnapping, so station security knew something was wrong. Her tracker was active, though it wouldn't help much once they made the jump to FTL. But that was fine. She didn't need rescue. She just needed her captors to realize exactly how badly they'd miscalculated. The Varandian Claw made its jump to FTL approximately 30 minutes after leaving Helix 9, heading toward a prearranged rendezvous point where they would transfer their hostage to the client. The jump went smoothly. The navigation was perfect. The systems all checked out. Then, about 2 hours into their journey, things started going wrong in that special way that things go wrong when the universe is trying to teach someone a lesson, but that someone is really bad at taking tests. "Captain." Thesik's voice came over the internal comm, carrying a note of concern that Vrin usually reserved for discussions about predator migration patterns. "We're experiencing some irregularities with the environmental systems." "Define irregularities." Zexis responded, not particularly concerned. "Ships had environmental hiccups. It was normal. The cargo hold atmosphere is fluctuating. Temperature has increased by 3 degrees. Pressure has increased by 0.2 standard. The system is compensating but struggling to maintain baseline." "Is it a mechanical failure?" "I don't think so. The system appears to be adapting. As if there's something in the cargo hold that's affecting the atmospheric balance." There was a pause while Zexis processed this. Then a longer pause while he tried to figure out what could possibly affect atmospheric balance. Then an even longer pause while a horrible suspicion began forming in his mind. "The human," he said slowly. "Is the human doing something? I'll check the cameras." They pulled up the cargo hold feed. Kira was sitting exactly where they'd left her, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who'd been kidnapped. She'd removed her jacket. She appeared to be breathing normally, though perhaps a bit deeper than before. "She's not doing anything," Thesik observed. "She's just sitting there." "Then why are the environmental systems reacting?" This was an excellent question that neither of them had the knowledge to answer. But the systems themselves were very clear about what was happening, if anyone had bothered to run a detailed diagnostic. The human was breathing. This seems obvious. All oxygen-breathing species breathe. But human breathing is special in that terrible way that everything about humans is special. They don't just exchange gases. They're walking chemical factories that produce carbon dioxide, water vapor, and trace amounts of various other compounds at rates that their ship's environmental systems were not designed to handle. A Kelsorian breathes approximately 4 liters of gas per minute. A Vrin breathes about 6. A human breathes somewhere between 8 and 12 liters per minute just at rest. And Kira was not at rest. She was slightly stressed, which had activated her sympathetic nervous system, which had increased her respiratory rate, which meant she was currently breathing about 15 liters per minute and exhaling enough carbon dioxide to confuse environmental systems that thought they were dealing with one small organic unit, not a biological carbon dioxide generator. "Increase the atmospheric processing," Zexis ordered. "Compensate for whatever she's doing." The systems tried. They really did. But here's the thing about systems designed for Kelsorians and Vryn. They're optimized for species whose environmental impact is minimal. The Varandian Claw's environmental processor was rated for a crew of 6 standard metabolizing beings. Kira Valdez's resting metabolism was approximately equivalent to 3 standard metabolizing beings. The ship's systems had not accounted for this because they had never needed to. In the 12,000 cycles that the Galactic Concordance had been classifying planets, they had never encountered a species quite like humans, who were simultaneously fragile enough to die from a moderate fall and robust enough to survive conditions that would send other species into shock. Over the next several hours, the situation deteriorated in ways that were both predictable and hilarious, depending on whether you were experiencing them or watching from a safe distance. The cargo hold temperature continued rising because Kira was producing approximately 100 watts of heat just by existing. The Varandian Claw's cooling systems, designed for a crew that ran cooler than humans, struggled to compensate. The humidity increased because humans are approximately 60% water and determined to share this fact with their environment through various pores. Kira was producing about a liter of water vapor per day through respiration and perspiration. And the ship's dehumidifiers were starting to make concerning noises. The oxygen content was dropping and carbon dioxide was rising because human lungs are absurdly efficient at what they do, which is convert oxygen into things that are not oxygen. For Kira, these conditions were moderately warm and a bit stuffy. She'd removed her jacket and was considering removing her outer shirt because it was getting close to 20 degrees standard, and she preferred working in cooler conditions. For her captors, monitoring these changes from the bridge, each incremental shift was sending alarm bells through their threat assessment systems. The human is somehow manipulating the atmospheric conditions, Thesic announced, his voice taking on that quality that Vryn developed when they were contemplating running away, but weren't sure which direction was safe. That's impossible, Zexis countered. She has no tools, no technology, no access to ship systems. Then explain the readings. Zexis couldn't, so he did what captains do when they can't explain something. He decided to confront it directly. I'm going to talk to her, he announced. Is that wise? Thesic asked, which was the question someone asks when they already know the answer but are hoping someone else will make the bad decision. We need to know what she's doing. Besides, she's locked in the cargo hold. What can she possibly do? This is called foreshadowing, and Zexis was about to experience a masterclass in it. He approached the cargo hold with Vict in tow because Vict was large and intimidating and made of rocks, which seemed like appropriate backup for questioning a small human. The door unsealed with a hiss, and the atmospheric difference hit them immediately. It was hot, not dangerously hot, but noticeably warmer than the rest of the ship, and humid. And the air tasted wrong in a way that Zexis's chemical sensors couldn't quite identify, but his hindbrain absolutely hated. Kira looked up from where she was sitting, still looking remarkably comfortable. She'd rolled up her sleeves. Her face was slightly flushed, and there was moisture on her skin that Zexis's brain cataloged as some kind of warning discharge. Yes? She asked politely. What are you doing to my ship? Zexis demanded, trying to sound authoritative while his body was screaming at him that the atmosphere was wrong and he should leave immediately. Breathing, Kira replied, as if this explained everything. Which it did, but not in any way that Zexis could comprehend. The environmental systems are malfunctioning because of you. Stop whatever you're doing. Kira's expression shifted into something that looked like concern, but felt like something else entirely. I can't stop breathing, That would be fatal. For me, I mean. You'd be fine, but I'd be dead in about 4 minutes. You're doing more than breathing. The temperature has increased by 6 degrees. Has it? Kira looked around as if noticing for the first time. Huh. Sorry about that. Humans tend to run warm. It's a metabolic thing. We're endothermic. What does that mean? It means we generate our own heat internally. Most of it comes from converting nutrients into energy. But we also have this really inefficient thermoregulation system that involves producing liquid from our skin to cool down through evaporation. It's very primitive, but it works remarkably well in hot environments. She said this as if it was normal, as if every species just casually generated their own heat and leaked liquids from their skin. Zexus felt his confidence beginning to develop cracks. You're telling me your species' body actively produces heat? About 100 watts, give or take, depending on activity level. More if I exercise, less if I sleep. It's actually pretty efficient for a biological system, though not compared to something like a fusion reactor. Vict made his gravel noise, which in this context probably meant this is concerning. And the moisture on your skin, Zexus pressed. Sweat. It's a cooling mechanism. When the environment gets too warm, we produce liquid from specialized glands, and as it evaporates, it removes heat from our body surface. Very effective in dry heat, less effective in humid conditions, which is why tropical climates feel worse than desert climates at the same temperature. She was explaining this the way someone might explain a simple machine. Matter of fact, technical. Not at all concerned that she was describing a biological system that was actively hostile to the ship's environmental controls. This is a containment vessel, Zexus said, his voice rising slightly. The systems aren't designed for this kind of thermal output. No offense, but your containment systems are pretty weak. This is barely warmer than my office back on Earth. Comfortable room temperature for humans is around 22 degrees standard. This is what, 19? 20? This is 17 degrees above baseline. Right. But baseline for who? Kelzorians run cold. I looked up your species before this meeting. You guys prefer about 12 degrees and low humidity. That's basically refrigerator temperature for humans. We'd be uncomfortable but functional. The way she said, I looked up your species, carried implications that Zexus was just beginning to understand. She'd known. Before the kidnapping, she'd researched them, which meant she'd expected something like this, which meant she'd let them take her. You knew we were going to kidnap you, he said slowly. I suspected. The message was suspicious. The timing was convenient. And you guys really need to work on your operational security. The Varandian Claw's departure was filed 3 hours before your urgent meeting request arrived. That's not how legitimate traders operate. If you knew, why didn't you report us? Kira smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been playing a different game the entire time. I did. Station security has your identity, your ship signature, your declared destination, and a warrant waiting for you at every registered station within 6 sectors. But I was also curious. Curious? About what you wanted and how far you'd go? About whether this was a professional operation or amateur hour? About how long it would take you to realize your mistake? What mistake? But Zexus's voice had lost its authority. He knew. He was starting to know. You kidnapped someone from a Class 12 Deathworld and locked them in a small metal box with minimal life support. Did you actually read Earth's classification file, or just the summary? The classification is being reviewed. It's clearly an error. Kira laughed. It was not a comfortable sound in the small space. It's not an error. It's insufficient. Earth is where evolution decided to run every possible experiment in lethality simultaneously. We have weather systems that throw around more energy than most species' weapons. We have ocean currents that could power small civilizations. We have microorganisms that eat stone in atmospheric conditions that vary by 50 degrees, depending on the time of day and location. Exaggeration. Is it? Let me tell you about Earth. Our atmosphere is 21% oxygen, which most species consider highly flammable and reactive. We live in it. We require it. We evolved in it. Our planet's surface gravity is 0.98 standard, which means every human you meet has been doing weight training their entire life just by standing up. Our planet is 70% covered in salt water that will kill you if you drink it, and we learned to cross it in wooden boxes before we invented writing. She stood up slowly, and even though she was significantly shorter than Zexus, something about the movement made him step back. We survive temperatures from -40 to +50 degrees Celsius. We heal from injuries that would permanently disable other species. We have persistence hunting strategies where we literally chase prey until it dies of exhaustion because we can regulate our temperature and they can't. We're not the fastest or the strongest or the most armored, but we're the ones who looked at every inhospitable environment on our planet and said, I'm going to live there anyway. You're trying to intimidate me. No, I'm trying to educate you. Because in about 6 more hours, your environmental systems are going to fail completely, and you're going to have to make some very difficult decisions. The systems are compensating. The systems are dying. They're designed for species with minimal environmental impact. I'm passively altering the atmospheric composition of this entire cargo hold just by existing. Give it time, and I'll affect the entire ship. And here's the really fun part. These conditions are uncomfortable for me. They're lethal for you. Vict spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he was the only one on the ship capable of basic threat assessment. How long can you survive in here? In current conditions? Indefinitely. I've got some water, I'm not particularly hungry yet, and the temperature is tolerable. If it gets hotter, I'll be uncomfortable but functional up to about 35 degrees standard. After that, I'll need water and shade, but I can survive. Heat exhaustion doesn't set in for humans until around 40 degrees in humid conditions. And us? Vict asked, because he was still the smart one. Kelzorians start experiencing system stress at around 22 degrees. Vryn have a slightly higher tolerance, but start struggling at 25. I'm not sure about Paxorians, because silicon-based life forms are weird. But I'm guessing extreme heat isn't great for your crystalline structure. You're weaponizing your biology, Zexus said, and he sounded almost impressed under the horror. I'm existing. You're the ones who built a cage that can't contain what you put in it. That's not weaponization. That's just really poor planning. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the ship's environmental systems working overtime, and the faint sound of Kira's breathing, which now that they were paying attention, seemed remarkably loud for something that wasn't supposed to be threatening. Zexus made a decision. We're going to adjust the environmental controls, bring the cargo hold back to baseline. That'll be uncomfortable for me. You'll survive. Will I? Kira's expression was unreadable. How cold are we talking? 10 degrees standard, normal operating temperature for this vessel. Kira considered this. 10 degrees Celsius, cold but not freezing, uncomfortable but survivable with her jacket. Fine, but I'll need my jacket back. Agreed. They left the cargo hold, and Zexus immediately ordered the environmental controls reset to baseline. The ship's systems, relieved to be working within normal parameters again, complied happily. Inside the cargo hold, Kira put her jacket back on and settled in to wait. 10 degrees wasn't pleasant, but she'd camped in worse conditions. Besides, she was curious how long it would take them to realize that the environmental problem wasn't solved, just delayed. Humans, you see, have this annoying habit of adapting. Their bodies are incredibly good at adjusting to environmental conditions through a process called thermoregulation. When it's cold, they shiver, which generates heat through rapid muscle contractions. They also vasoconstrict, reducing blood flow to extremities to preserve core temperature. Their metabolism increases slightly, burning more energy to produce more heat. All of which meant that Kira was about to become a very inefficient biological furnace in a very small metal box. 4 hours later, the environmental systems were struggling again. The cargo hold temperature had climbed back to 15 degrees. Humidity was increasing, and on the bridge, Thesic was running diagnostics that made less and less sense. "She's doing it again," he announced. "Doing what?" Zexis demanded. "We dropped the temperature." And her body compensated. According to the sensors, her metabolic rate increased by approximately 20%. She's generating more heat now than she was before. "That's impossible." "Tell that to the sensors." Zexis pulled up the cargo hold camera feed. Kira was wrapped in her jacket, moving around the space in what looked like calisthenics. Push-ups, squats, jogging in place. Her breath was visible in the cool air, coming out in rhythmic puffs of water vapor. "She's exercising," he said dumbly. "Why would she exercise?" "To stay warm," Vic rumbled. "Her species generates heat through muscle activity. She's compensating for the cold environment by increasing her activity level." "Make it colder," Zexis ordered. "Captain, if we make it much colder, we risk damaging the cargo. Some of our shipment is temperature sensitive. Make it colder." They dropped the temperature to 5 degrees standard. Kira stopped exercising, conserved her energy, and waited. Her body shivered automatically, generating heat. Her breathing slowed but deepened, maximizing oxygen intake. Her extremities were cold, but her core temperature remained stable. She'd gone hiking in worse conditions. 6 hours later, the ship's environmental systems had developed what the diagnostic report called catastrophic cascade failure due to impossible thermal load variance. In plain language, the systems had given up trying to figure out what was wrong and had decided to just shut down and let someone else deal with it. Temperature in the cargo hold, 8 degrees and rising slowly. Temperature in the rest of the ship, 14 degrees and rising faster. Kelzorian started experiencing cognitive impairment at 20 degrees. Vryn started experiencing respiratory distress at 23 degrees. Vict was fine because Silicon doesn't care. But even he was starting to feel uncomfortable as the ship's internal temperature crept toward 25 degrees. "We can't keep her," Zexis admitted finally, his mandibles drooping in a way that suggested exhaustion and defeat. "Her biology is incompatible with our ship's life support." "We could space her," Thesic suggested weakly, though his tone suggested he knew this was a terrible idea. "And explain to the client that we killed their hostage? Besides, there are complications." "Complications?" "I reviewed Earth's file. The actual file, not the summary. Class 12 isn't an error. Humans are classified as an extreme survivor species. They've survived extinction events, survived climate shifts, survived predation from species that should have eliminated them. Their biology is redundant to the point of absurdity. Dual kidneys, dual lungs, redundant vascular systems, regenerating organs, wound healing that borders on aggressive. Their immune system fights wars inside their body that would qualify as military conflicts on other planets. So if we try to kill her and fail, we'll have a very angry human loose on our ship. And if we succeed, we'll have Terran Colonial Administration hunting us for murder, which carries significantly worse penalties than kidnapping. What do we do? Zexus looked at the environmental readouts, at the slowly climbing temperatures, at the image of Kira Valdez sitting calmly in the cargo hold while his ship slowly became uninhabitable for his crew, and made the only logical decision. We negotiate. When Zexus entered the cargo hold for the second time, he was already sweating, and not just from the heat. Kira looked up from where she was sitting, still calm, still composed, still looking like someone who was having a much better day than he was. "Come to adjust the temperature again?" she asked. "Come to talk terms, specifically the terms of your release." I thought I was being ransomed. Plans change, circumstances evolve. I'm prepared to offer you immediate release and compensation for your inconvenience if you agree not to press charges and to provide a positive testimony about your treatment aboard this vessel. Kira's expression suggested she was enjoying this immensely. "So, you're negotiating with your hostage." "I'm recognizing a no-win scenario and taking steps to minimize damage." "Smart. Earth's file mentioned the survival statistics, didn't it?" "Yes. 98% of humans who survive the first year of life on Earth survive to at least 60 standard cycles. That's an absurd survival rate for a species from a Class 12 world. We're hard to kill. Comes from living on a planet that's been trying to kill us for our entire evolutionary history. We developed this really annoying trait where we just refuse to die even when it's convenient. I've noticed." Kira stood up, stretched, and Zexus noted that despite spending nearly 18 hours in uncomfortable conditions, she looked tired but functional. Not injured, not sick, just annoyed. "Here are my terms," she said. "You return me to Station Helix 9 immediately. You surrender to station security and cooperate fully with their investigation. You provide testimony about who hired you and why. In exchange, I'll recommend leniency in sentencing and testify that you maintained minimal standards of care during my captivity." That's more than I was offering. You kidnapped a human from a diplomatic station. Do you know what Terran Colonial Administration does to people who kidnap their diplomats? No. Neither do I, because nobody's been stupid enough to do it before. Do you really want to be the first? Zexus considered his options. Option 1. Continue holding a hostage whose biology was slowly making his ship uninhabitable. Option 2. Accept her terms and face the legal consequences. Option 3. Try something desperate and stupid. He chose option 2 because he was tired, hot, and beginning to understand why Earth was classified the way it was. Agreed. We'll return you to Helix 9. Excellent choice. One more thing. What? Fix your ship's environmental controls. They're not designed for species with high metabolic rates. If you're going to operate in human space, you need systems that can handle human biology. We're common enough now that you'll run into this problem again. Noted. The Varandian Claw made the return jump to Helix 9 with its environmental systems running at maximum capacity, and its crew learning a valuable lesson about reading classification files completely. When they docked, station security was waiting, along with a very interested Terran Colonial Administration representative who had a lot of questions about unauthorized hostage situations. Kira disembarked, looking slightly rumpled, but otherwise fine. She gave her testimony, recommended the minimum sentence given their cooperation, and went back to her quarters for a shower and a meal. 3 days later, she was back in trade negotiations. and if her counterparts noticed that she seemed more confident than before, they attributed it to successful diplomacy rather than successful survival. The Galactic Concordance updated Earth's classification file with a new appendix titled Biological Containment Considerations for Human Subjects. It was 17 pages long and contained multiple warnings about metabolic rates, thermoregulation, chemical emissions, and the general inadvisability of attempting to kidnap humans. The appendix ended with a note that would become famous in certain circles. Human beings are individually fragile, but collectively unstoppable, personally vulnerable, but systemically dominant, seemingly weak, but functionally indestructible. They come from a planet that tried to kill them for millions of years and failed. Learn from that planet's mistake. Zexis read that note during his sentence at a rehabilitation facility where they taught convicted criminals about risk assessment and proper target selection. He learned a lot. Primarily, he learned to read classification files completely, to never underestimate species from high-gravity worlds, and to never, ever assume that small meant weak. And somewhere in the Terran Colonial Administration's classified files, there was a memo that read, "Recommend Kira Valdez for field promotion. Survived kidnapping through superior knowledge and biological attrition. Very funny, very effective, very human." Because at the end of the day, that's what humans did best. Survive things that should have killed them, adapt to conditions that should have stopped them, and occasionally turn their biology into a weapon without even trying. They came from a death world. They brought the death world with them wherever they went. And the galaxy was still figuring out what that meant, one confused kidnapping attempt at a time.